Hi, I'm Kat, and this video is another paranormal storytime video. I actually have quite a few of these. My life is average. Helga. So my cat Helga waits until I sit down and start talking to the camera to start making noise. She's sitting in the windowsill. Hagrid's over there grooming himself. You're just gonna have to deal with the cats. Sorry. So this was one of my earlier paranormal experiences. I grew up in Gilroy, California, which is, according to some people, a spiritual hotspot in the United States. This probably has something to do with it being on the original El Camino Real, which is a 600-mile stretch of road that was the original path that Spanish settlers took, that I think connected 21 Spanish missions in California. And anytime colonization or settling of a country occurs, there is quite a lot of dark crap that goes down. So the neophytes were basically natives who were taken and consequently converted to Catholicism. So I personally believe that this has a lot to do with some of the negative energy or residual energy that is in a lot of these spiritual hotspots. Gilroy is also a town in which really? Gilroy is also a town in which a lot of really old roads connected. So this included 101, 152, 129, and while that's pretty typical in California these days, back in the day that just wasn't really a thing. There weren't a lot of these really established highways. So Gilroy has a pretty long history, and there are actually a lot of ghost stories in that town that have been around for ages. Most people who live in Gilroy will know about Mr. Miller's daughter. They'll know about these ghosts on Hecker Pass. There are ghosts in Christmas Hill Park, on 10th Street, on Monterey Highway, and it's just kind of like a part of Gilroy's urban legends. I grew up really close to Gilroy High, which is on 10th Street, and I think that's part of the reason that the house I grew up in is so freaking haunted. And it wasn't just me that had weird experiences there. I know several of my friends had weird experiences there. My relatives did as well. One of the first ones that I remember, and it's the reason I'm still scared, for lack of a better word, of vacuuming when I'm home alone. Hagrid, can't you do that somewhere else? Like, you have to do that right now? Oh, gross. I hate when you make that sound. Stop. Stop. I love you. So my family moved into my grandmother's house in Gilroy by Gilroy High when I was 5 years old, I think, and we lived in her house for decades. She actually ended up moving to Hawaii, and we stayed in the house and rented it from her. And my grandfather died, I think, a couple of years before my oldest sister was born. My family didn't talk about him a lot when we were little, and there weren't a lot of photos of him around the house. But since he died before we were born, he just wasn't really a part of our lives, which is really sad when you think about it, and we didn't learn about him until we got to be in our teens. This is one of the only times that I've ever seen a ghost, for lack of a better word, that looked just like a full-fledged person. I also don't necessarily think that all ghosts are ghosts. I mean, when you think about it, time isn't linear, and everything that ever has or will exist is existing. We're just viewing it at a different place in time. We're just viewing it at a different place in time, and I think sometimes that that string of time gets bent, and we see things that aren't typically there in the place in time that we are existing. I mean, it's really complicated. I'm not going to get into like quantum mechanics and string theory with you on this video. So I think sometimes we're just like glimpsing different parts of time. That said, this version of this ghost that I saw would not have been a version of my grandfather that ever existed in that house. He was very sick, and I'm pretty sure he was very sick from the time when they were still living in Puerto Rico, and they moved to California to be closer to his brothers. He wouldn't have been walking around, he wouldn't even necessarily have really been himself in that house. So this was one of the first times I ever saw an apparition to the extent that it just looked like a person. And my family was in this religious organization that later turned into a cult, but that's a whole other story. My life is average. And we used to have meetings in our house that were called twigs. This video is getting more complicated by the second. They were fellowships. That sounds weird too. God. The more I think about my childhood, the weirder it gets. They were fellowships, what else would you call that? They were meetings, they were Bible study groups that we would have in our living room, like every Thursday night or something, and we'd get together and we'd study the Bible, and we would sing songs, and it just sounds so weird. Anyway, there were a lot of people in and out of our house that I didn't necessarily know all the time, and my grandmother constantly had company over, she constantly had friends over, she was always witnessing to people, and Bible study was a big part of our lives. So it wasn't unusual for me to see people I didn't know in our house, but usually it was when my grandma was there or my parents were there and they were with them. So the back bedroom in the house was kind of like this U shape. Her bedroom was kind of like the opposite end of the house from the kitchen and the family room where everyone would kind of spend most of their time. So we all had our chores. So I must have been about 7 or 8 years old around this time, and I was vacuuming in my grandmother's room in the back end of the house. And we had just gotten a Kirby vacuum, which was really loud, so you couldn't really hear anything other than the vacuum when you were using it. And I felt someone tap me on my lower back, and it startled me, and then I turned around, and the person who I assumed had tapped me wasn't as close as you would expect someone to be when they tapped you. He was kind of like across the room, like I was in the middle of the room like I am here, and he was standing in the doorway like where my door is now, so maybe about 8 to 10 feet. And he was like pointing and he was telling me something and he looked very concerned, and so I just assumed, you know, he was like a friend of my grandmother's and somehow had gotten lost in the house. I don't really know what I thought was going on. It was weird. I had never seen him before. He looked concerned. He was I mean, he was tall for me at the time, but now that I think about it, he was probably more like 5'9", somewhere around that range. He looked like he was maybe 60 years old. He didn't have very much hair. And I was like, oh, 1 second. And I turned around to turn off the vacuum cleaner, and it's this pedal that you step on to turn on and off. And so I stepped on the pedal, and then I turned around to ask him what he was saying again, and he was just gone. So I was like, okay. So I went to look for him, didn't want him wandering around the house. And I looked around, wasn't in any of the other rooms. I went up to the kitchen where everyone else in the family was, and I was like, who is here? And they had no idea what I was talking about. And it was Thursday, so we were gonna have people over, but no one had arrived yet. And I don't really know what I thought. I think everyone was just kind of like, nobody's here, you're crazy. And I just like went on with my life and didn't think much of it. Then, about a month later, we were looking at family photo albums, and they pulled out this photo that was of the guy that I saw, and I'm like, oh, that's the guy who was here, who I saw. And it was my grandfather, which was really creepy. But it wasn't the photos of my grandfather that I had seen before. I had only seen photos of him when he was like maybe, I don't know, 30 or 40, around the time that he married my grandmother, because she had this one framed photo of him that she kept in her bedroom, which was the only one I had seen. It was like in this gold frame, and it had an oval shaped mat on it, and it was them kind of like in a classic prom pose. And I think it was of their wedding, and that was pretty much the only thing I had ever seen of him. So then to see him older and realize, okay, that's who that was was pretty freaky. And I was immediately like adamant, like that was him, that was 100% him. And then instead of just being peaceful about it and being like, oh, he visited you, how nice, my grandmother told me about how devil spirits will mimic people that you know in order to trick you. So that was horrifying. But then I was like, well, I didn't know who he was, so if it was a devil spirit, wouldn't they have picked someone I knew if they were gonna try and trick me? How about that? And instead it just made her paranoid, so she like went around praying in the whole house, and yeah, we were like on spiritual lockdown for a week or so there, and that's how that went. God, my life is totally normal. So now that I think back to it, I don't know, maybe he was trying to tell me something. Maybe he was like, yo, you got a tumor down there, better take care of that. I don't know, he could have communicated that a little bit better, maybe when I wasn't vacuuming. But you know, thanks for the effort, Grandpa. Nice seeing you. So I personally would like to think that he did come and visit me for whatever reason. Don't know why he chose that particular timing or why he chose me, who didn't recognize him, but there you have it. I don't really think it was a devil spirit trying to trick me. I don't even really know if I necessarily believe in devil spirits. I don't want to get into like a whole theological discussion on what I believe, but I don't know about the whole devil spirit thing. I think a lot of what we see as evil in the world is just kind of like our own making and our own separation from God and light and love and the good parts of the universe. But maybe that's just me not wanting to give power to evil. So yeah, that's a thing. So that's how I view that experience. I think it was a positive thing. I don't really know what it meant or what the purpose of it was, but every other time I've been visited, so to speak, by the dearly departed, I think it's been really positive experiences with positive messages, and they're experiences that I hold really dear to me. So I don't know, maybe I'll never figure out what he was there for. Maybe he was trying to tell me about the tumor. And even though I didn't really know anything about my grandfather at the time, over the years I've gotten to know him, so to speak, through scanning hundreds of photographs that he had on slides. He was an avid photographer and really loved to document his life and the lives of his children. So it's been really fun getting to know him in that way, and in hearing stories about him and his personality through his brothers, my great uncles, who I was very lucky to get to know through their lives. And so I really do feel that even though he wasn't present, I have an idea of who he was as a person and his essence, and I'm just so grateful. And I feel honored that he came to visit for whatever reason. So, not all of my paranormal story times are necessarily bad things, but let me know if you want to hear more story times about the random paranormal experiences I had growing up in a haunted house in a haunted town. Good times. And if you enjoyed this video, please click that like button. It really helps my videos get seen.